Appleton police used flock cameras to quickly identify the people responsible for damaging the windows of several businesses with slingshots and glass marbles over the weekend. Sam Goodman has the details of the case and how Appleton police use that technology.
Appleton police say it started as a scary call Sunday night. Damage to a business window that, at first, looked like it could have been from gunfire.
It looked like it could have potentially been bullet holes. Thankfully, through great investigative work, the use of Alper technology, multiple witness statements, and video from the business, officers were able to determine that it was actually slingshot and glass marbles that caused the damage.
Police say the key was timing, with the investigation team reviewing security video from one of the businesses, only seeing one vehicle pass by at the time of the event. From there, police used a nearby flock license plate reader camera to grab the plate, identify the registered owner, and make contact at the home. Police say by Monday, suspects admitted to using slingshots to damage multiple businesses and signs. At least 6 incidents have been confirmed so far.
These cases wouldn't have been solved, wouldn't have been able to connect the dots as quickly as we were able to without the use of all of the technology we have available to us to leverage that.
At the body shop, the tattoo parlor along North Richmond that found itself with a broken window, owner David Jacobs is faced with expensive repairs.
The cost of the window is going to be somewhere around $1,200 to $1,500 installed, and then replacing the vinyls another $500 to $600, so a couple grand out of pocket.
Jacobs says in this case, the technology helped, but even as someone benefiting from the cameras in this instance, he has mixed feelings about flock long term.
It's a double-edged sword. In this incident, it works out. I'm not necessarily one for full-time surveillance, but you know, if it's used properly, it's just another device for them to use.
The city of Appleton is currently in the process of ending the use of flock cameras, and their removal from the city is set to take place throughout July. Police still cite the technology as a useful resource in quickly solving cases with few witnesses. In the newsroom, Sam Goodman, Action 2 News.